Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in bountiful Bakersfield, California. This is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael, and today we welcome back to the show Priestess of Avalon, Georgina Sirett-Armstrong-Smith. She was on our show, I think about 2 years ago it was, almost, I think it was in July actually. So we're really happy to have her back, and today she's going to be talking about Hedge Witchery. Georgina has dedicated herself for 2 decades as a full-time priestess, living in around Glastonbury, where she's zooming in from. And she teaches classes, she does karmic astrology, tarot readings, and has some wonderful courses. So we're really excited to talk to her today about this great topic. But before we get started, Michael does have some announcements.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our show. We've got a really special episode coming up next week. We have author Gary Lockman. He'll be talking about the role that occult plays in modern political movements. So you guys definitely want to check that out. And then we're setting up some great shows for the coming month for July as well. So lots going on. Check our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SIXTH, all spelled out. While you're there, buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi if you can afford to. It helps us cover some of our production cost. And then also the Saturday coming up, the first Saturday of July, we're going to have a little virtual meet and greet. So you can RSVP for that on the website as well. And it's from 10 o'clock in the morning Pacific until noon for a couple hours. So chat with me and Krista about whatever you would like to chat with. And we're looking forward to that. There's all kinds of great stuff. So don't want to take up too much time today because Georgina is such a fascinating guest. So I'm going to kick it back to you guys. So take it away, Krista and Georgina.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And welcome, Georgina.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me back. It's lovely to see you.
You too. We really enjoyed you before. And this is like the perfect day to do it by chance because we're right before the solstice.
Yes. Many blessings for the solstice. And of course, most people here will be at Stonehenge. But today we've had a disaster at Stonehenge where some activists have covered the stones with orange paint.
I just saw that by chance. I mean, really, why in the world would someone do such an awful thing?
There are some things that are beyond sacred, and that's just one of the things you don't do.
Yeah.
And yes, it was members of the public that managed to get to them first and bring them down. So.
Well, hopefully they'll be able to remedy that pretty quickly, but that is very sad. And I mean, I don't see how that helps their cause at all. I would say it's sort of going to be the opposite effect.
It won't. No, it won't indeed. But they'll look after the stones. They'll get them right.
That's good.
It won't be ready for the solstice tomorrow, but there'll be sent a lot of healing from people.
That's true. Well, it sort of brings attention to it. So perhaps that might be a good thing in the long run. And just because even though it's the wrong kind of attention. Also, I just read recently that it is the earliest solstice since 1796 because we had a leap year. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, the solstices do shift. And sometimes they're later, as late as the 22nd or 23rd. But yes, 19th, 20th is certainly quite early.
It is. So I thought before we jumped right into this really fascinating topic that it might be good to talk about the idea first that witchcraft itself has many paths and sort of your take on that idea. Just as sort of a general theme.
Yes, because the way that we're offering to teach is the ancient form of Hedge Witchery, which were sole practitioners. and they weren't in the coven. That sort of comes a bit later with Wiccan. And we sort of go back to the very ancient days of the cunning women, the women who held the mysteries and education of themselves, what they've learned of childbirth and illnesses and deaths. They used to prepare the dead for burial. And they lived on their own. They didn't come as part of a coven at all. So it's very much a dedication to become a hedge witch. And yeah, so yes, lots of different types of people consider themselves witches, but we go back to the original ancient form of it.
And where does that word hedge come from? It's such a great word.
I know, it's lovely. It conjures up all sorts of imagination of women peeking out the hedge. But it varies from where you are, which country you're in, which part of the UK even you're in, as to what it means exactly. But hedge witches lived on their own, and they normally lived in the woods, fairly isolated, so they were not easily found. And people had to know exactly where to go to find them. Because they moved about a lot in the woods, it looked to those that were superstitious as if they were flying on the hedge. So, all they could see was their top half above the hedge moving maybe from time to time. And so it was considered that they were flying the hedge. So, yeah, that's why they're called hedge witches.
And then, so if they were difficult to find, how did they pass on their knowledge? Did they take on an apprentice, or was it a family driven tradition? How did that work?
They took on an apprentice. It was a very hard work, and they took them on from a very, very early age. So if it wasn't their own daughter that they took on, then they might have a child, or whether it's female or male, from the village who wants to learn or has shown an aptitude towards it, because you had to have a very good memory, because nothing was written down. So everything was passed from word of mouth.
And it's interesting. I never thought about the solitary witch coming before the coven. I mean, I don't know that I had an opinion about it, but that is interesting, that and sort of makes a little bit of sense in some ways that came before. But I think the popular image of witchcraft now is the coven and the witch. I mean, at least, what's been, even though there's, of course, many solitary practitioners that have been, around even in the early days when witchcraft was getting popular here and in the UK. But that is interesting. It sounds like it's largely women that were hedge witches. Is that true, or were men?
No, you got male hedge witches, and there wasn't any bias towards one or the other. It just happened to be more women that did it. I think because of the childbirth issue, people probably weren't comfortable with having a man, which was a bit taboo at the birth of a child. So it was normally mostly women because they had those skills.
And did they practice more healing arts? Did they also do spell work? What kinds of things? And even today, obviously, there's a hedge witchcraft today. What are the main things that they do if you're a hedge witch?
Well, yes, they did healing because they had the knowledge of the herbs and remedies of the common ailments at that particular time, and especially pain relief during childbirth. But yes, they would dabble in spells, and some of them dabbled in curses. So this is where they got a bad reputation, because not all hedge witches were good hedge witches, and some of them were meddlesome and quite threatening, because if you think you're being cursed in those days, you believed it 100%, because lack of education or lack of Google, you wouldn't be able to actually work it out, that it may be superficial. So yes, that not all of them were good women, but the majority were good women.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the idea of the hex or curse and healing. I know that in one of her books, Z Budapest talks about, to be a healer, you need to know how to hex. And there's something to that, I think, whether you use it or not, that idea that you're aware of all sorts of magic, and even if it's just that you're aware if someone does it to you. So, I think too that from what I can understand, there's sort of different kinds of curses, in the sense that there are some that appear to be legitimate, that they're like a last resort. And then there's sort of the ones that are just built on greed and sort of someone wanting to harm someone for no good reason. So there's the hex or curse that could be a good reason, like when the witches were trying to hex Donald Trump, some time ago. They publicly told him that they were, and I thought, that's actually not a bad idea. So
you see, certain things have not changed that much, when we look back to the problems that they also had in those days. They were also influenced by how they hex and curse. In actual fact, there's no difference between a hex and a curse. They both do the same job. But it's the consequences. And we're I say we because I'm co-teaching it this year with a wonderful woman called Susie Phoenix. And mainly because the whole thing's just taken off. And so she's helping and we're doing it together. But we're very lucky to have, I don't know if you know of her, Dr. Liz Williams. And she is a renowned witch in Glastonbury who's had probably what was the most traditional witchcraft shop that's ever been. It was incredible. And we invite her along to do spells, hexes and consequences. And so I think what comes out of it is, because this power of 3, it doesn't exist with hedge witches. It's something that came in later, more with the covens. And so we don't have this belief in power of 3. If you want to hex. But it's being prepared for the consequences of what might happen. And so that's what we teach them. It's about, being aware that if you alter a path in some way, and it does happen, it really does happen, then you have to be aware of what may happen to that person. And once you let that arrow go, you've got no control over it.
Right.
That's it. It's gone. So yes, you have to be very careful who you hex. I mean, some of the more popular things to do today is warding and banishing, because at least you can keep that person at bay or away from you. So it's about as much as protection and warding and banishing as it is in hexing.
Well, I think the idea of consequences is really the perfect thing. And even with somewhat, benign magic, there are consequences that you don't always expect. For instance, one year we would do traditionally, we haven't done it for a little while, but traditionally on sort of October 31st, we would do sort of a wish. We'd make a wish, and we did this public ritual with people where they could honor their ancestors and then make a wish for the year. And I wished for more patience. And the consequences of that were really difficult. Even my husband was like, why is she wishing for patience? And I realized even things that are meant well, and they were, and I would say, maybe I got more patience. I don't know, but it was really trying year. And so it's interesting just thinking about any kind of consequence when you do even a simple magical wish or spell.
Most definitely, and they all have consequences. And I've got very close just recently to banishing something, and by the time that I sort of got everything together and then was about to execute this banishing, I thought of the consequences of what might happen and thought it through, and I thought, just walk away from it. It's not worth it. So it really does make you think. And that's what we want our hedgelets to learn and to be aware of, and to take responsibility for themselves and their actions and inactions. So we want them to be able to serve the community if that's what they wish, or to become sole practitioners and just do their own thing. It's entirely up to them. And they can dedicate as different types of hedge witches. They might want to be a kitchen witch or a green witch, a healing witch. They may want to be a doula witch of some sort. So there's so many different ways that they can dedicate that path and take it up, but we're giving them that opportunity to try everything.
Yeah, I was wondering if the kitchen witch would have some association with the hedge witch, because they also like the hearth and home and work in that arena, and of course work a lot with food and natural things. So I thought they might have at least some commonality in it.
Oh, totally. We send them off foraging with an expert, I might add. And she takes them off foraging. And then the next day, they're making all sorts of food with what they've gathered, teas, and lotions and potions as well they get to make as a result of their own foraging. And we will be offering next year this course on Zoom. So we obviously won't be able to do absolutely everything we do here in Avalon, but we will be encouraging our far-flung little hedgelets to go off foraging and come back with what they've gathered and what they can do with it.
And so how long have you been associated with hedge witchcraft?
Maybe since I was about 6 or 7. Yes, I tend to be in Glastonbury. I tend to be the hedge witch hidden in plain sight.
See, I didn't even know that.
Because they look at me and go.
Well, why would they do that? Why would they look at you like that?
I think people think of pointed hats and cloaks and staffs, and I do have all those things, but I'm a hedge witch, so you don't always see it.
Well, if you look at, I remember coming across these somewhat older photographs. I don't think maybe they were from the 40s, of witches in the countryside, and they just looked like country people. They had none of the and I like some of the outer, ritualistic things, but I've also come to feel that it's been a little overemphasized, and that witches come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. They could wear business suits and you wouldn't know it. And
yes.
It's just your style. I mean, that's just more of like, if that's how you want to express yourself, great, but it's become a little too much associated with witchcraft. And when you look at people that are completely powerful magically, they don't always wear any kind of witchcraft garment.
I think it's people's perceptions as to what they think we should wear. I often do hand fastings and turn up, and I'm looking not too much like I look today, except for with a headdress on, and they expect me to turn up with a cloak or a pointed hat, or usually start an aid kit. They're quite disappointed.
Now, is there a formal initiation to become a hedge witch?
The willingness to dedicate themselves. It's not about just the fact that we can teach them different skills. It's a way to be. They've got to embrace the seriousness of what they're doing, to be involved with their hedge every day and watch the changes of the seasons and work with the elements, and to know that everything that they do is sacred. And we can have fun and we can laugh and do lots of wonderful things, but it comes with a warning that everything we do is sacred, because we teach them about the sacred tools and the history of hedge witchery, and also so many different types of skills that they can dip into that we teach them, and they can decide whether they want to do tarot, for example, or whether they want to do astrology or palmistry. Whatever it is that we're showing them, they can take it up and take it away with them.
So obviously then people have sort of probably things they prefer to do, whether it's the divination side or whether it's more of being in nature and working with the natural elements. But are there some maybe basic things most hedge witches do, you would say, generally speaking, sort of a rudimentary things that is common for most of them?
Normally, they need to know how to smudge people. They need to know about the elements that they're working with, maybe the goddess of that particular season, the hedgerow, and what it's doing. Obviously, things that are grown in the hedgerow, whether it's medicinal, culinary, or magic, they have to be able to identify each plant that's in their personal hedgerow. And when we teach them how to use their book of shadows, visualizations, holding space is one of the biggest things that they have been really taking on board and learning. Just holding space for themselves and other people. But it could be crystals, numerology, moon magic, it could be any of these things that we cover. And it's just a very, very active, interesting course. And no two weekends are the same.
So we should mention what you're talking about with your course. So you have a course, because you've referred to it a couple times, and we'll say it a little bit more clearly for people. You offer a course on hedge witchcraft. Is it a yearly and annual course that you offer through Zoom?
We did with the first year, and the second year we did it as a 13. We are doing it as a 13 weekends, but we've decided, because we didn't want to skip over a lot of things and spend more time, more quality time with some subjects, that we're making it 8 weekends a year, and those 8 weekends will tie in with the seasonal of the wheel, and it will be a 2-year course instead, so that they have more quality time and being able to spend time practicing it more as well.
That's really cool, and that does even require a pretty big commitment for people. That's a 2-year course. Yes, it is. And it will be the same for the Zoom people as well. It will be a 2-year course. And it is a commitment.
But then that's part of what you're doing. You're not doing it as a bit of fun or ticking it up as another course and I've done that now. No, this is a way of life. This is a way to be. So you don't do this course unless you're committed to actually want to make some difference to yourself and your community.
So it sounds like it's sort of like, I know we talked about that on your show before, the priestess having duties to the community. It sounds like the hedge witchcraft has that as well, which not all forms of magic do.
No, we're trying to bring our hedge witches up to the 21st century in being able to do things. So just like we were trying to be a more active priestess in the 21st century, we want our hedgelets to be able to do the same. And at the end of the course, they will be expected to dedicate. And again, they do not do that lightly. It is something, and they have to dedicate to either a deity or to an element or to the elements. But it is indicative of what they're choosing to dedicate as, you know, whether it's an earth goddess, a fire goddess, or something like that.
Well, that makes sense. So, yeah, I think it's a little more intense to dedicate yourself to a deity from what my understanding of people that have, and the work that seems to come because of it. It isn't always something that's easy, it sounds like, from what I understand.
No, and I don't think it will come easy even dedicating it to the elements. They'll have their ways of pushing you in the direction you didn't expect to happen. But I think that happens to us all when we take on something new. I know with the priestessing course, I did 6 years of training to become a priestess, and I had no idea the directions that I was going to take and the life-changing things that happened to me during that period of time. It was amazing. And yeah, it was quite shocking as well, surprising. So what I've noticed with our first years, and we're halfway through the second year hedgelets, is that their lives are changing as well, and all sorts of things are happening, and they're coming to the end of this cycle, the first years of their 13 weekends, and wow, the changes that they have made is quite extraordinary.
Now, are there certain areas of the world that seem more drawn to the hedge witchcraft, or is it being more universally accepted? Sometimes you'll see certain trends with certain kinds of witchcraft in certain regions of the world.
As far as people taking interest in our course, which is probably the only thing that I can speak for, is that for the face-to-face, obviously we've had the UK, and there's a lot of interest in the UK, and we've got people waiting to join and sign up for the next face-to-face course. But what's amazed me is that for the Zoom course is that we've had so much interest, and a lot of it from America.
Ah, I could see why. Well, there's something, I mean, even the word is really...
source here in Avalon.
the word is appealing. I think there's definitely a big interest in connecting their spiritual practice to the earth. I mean, that's always been popular, I think. And I think that the hedge witchcraft has that already sort of in it. I could see that. And then I think many people need, or maybe they don't need, because some people are self-taught and it's perfectly fine. I mean, but some people really want to be trained by, you know, someone like you that has been doing things for a long time. And I think that's the other thing you have to offer. It sounds like you have you and the other person that you have involved, that you have this really depth of experience, which is something you just can't replace it. No matter how brilliant you are at the beginning, there is nothing like life experience. So
no, and I totally agree, because Susie is also a priestess, but she's also a witch, and she went down a learning and a training to be a witch. So she comes from a strong ethical background of witchcraft. I was more self-taught. I didn't go on a course for hedge witchery. There wasn't such a thing. But Susie has. And we, between us, that you have got such a massive amount. You've got about over 100 years of learning between us. I didn't want to add that up for a minute, really. But yes, it's quite incredible. You know, if you're going to learn, yes, come learn with us, because we have fun, but it is sacred, and you learn an awful lot about yourselves, and what you want to do in your life. And you asked who was interested, but what we've also found is that we've had a lot of women sort of 40 years upwards, shall we say. And I think it's because they're looking for that meaning in their life as to what they want to be able to do. And a lot of them are grandmothers, and they want to be able to pass on to their granddaughters some of the old knowledge that they may be not have allowed to acknowledge themselves, because it was taboo for so long. And now it's become more acceptable. And hey, there's a course they can actually teach their granddaughters, which are the next generations and the next generations. So just like the apprentice to the Hedge Witch all that time ago, where it had to be given by word of mouth and teaching, so it will be for the granddaughters of the future.
Oh, that's really nice. I love that. I know that's been one of the challenges of some of the Indigenous people, is if their children are interested in learning some of the things that they know. And also it's arduous. It takes more time when you have rituals and memorization and songs, and that has been a challenge sometimes for certain tribes, I know, at least in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine, because a lot of Indigenous people have not been treated well, no matter where they are in the world. And it has been very hard for them to express their culture and to be able to go somewhere where they can openly learn it and to be able to use it effectively. And they have so much to teach us. We really do. And I hate to have to say it, and I'm not the bringer of doom and gloom, but there will be a time when the machine stops, you know, when things break down and we don't have that amazing technology that we all enjoy today. And I enjoy it as much as anybody. But we're going to have to go back to basics at some point. And somebody's got to learn how to help childbirth and all the old things that never went away.
Yeah, it really is. It's a shame. And whenever I read, I go in and out of learning about our own history here in the United States with the indigenous cultures. It's just so shocking, and it's still going on. It's horrible. And it's a terrible loss for everybody because of the connection to nature and the earth. And I think any groups that seek to bring more connection to nature and the earth certainly should be encouraged, because we all know that it often does get neglected, and that technology can either hurt or help it. And so it's up to the individuals to decide, and every single person matters in this situation.
They do. And often I look at people who are greedy, who are very brash, new money, you know, the Trumps of the world. They're new souls. They don't have that depth of soul that's been around for many, many lifetimes, or the depth of that heritage. whereby they can really appreciate what is right under their nose. And I just think it's a huge shame, and it should never, ever be dismissed. I think it should be encouraged. And I think, yes, I mean, I used to do talks to universities and colleges about priestessing and hedge witches, and there is a lot of interest in it for the young people as well. It's not, I did say mainly from the age of 40 upwards, but there are younger people who are interested, and it should be encouraged. As I said, they're our future granddaughters.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it seems like you can encourage it through the grandmothers and the granddaughters and even the mothers in between, I would say. So in your experience, are there still hedge witches that you might know, since you're involved in it, that like to be more secluded, that find it easier for them to do their work in the world?
Yes, I think you get Starhawk, for example. She's one of our greatest examples of being a hedge witch. She's very solitary practitioner, but she works for the community, and you do get others that are very open about it, and the ones that aren't open, well, that's why they're hedge witches. You have to look for them in the hedge.
Yeah, I'd like that. There is a misperception in this culture that power is always visible, and that you are seen as successful only if you're visibly successful. But that is actually not true. And you'll see that with people behind movements. There will be very powerful people behind a movement. There'll be a powerful person behind, and that gives them some advantage at times because people don't know them as well. That is sort of a strategy that some people have. And then some people just want to be private.
Yes, and they are private, and they carry on with their rituals and their own ceremonies, their own prayers. They care for the land. They may choose certain areas that they're protectors of, or wells that they look after, but it's done quite privately, as opposed to sort of being out there with a little sign saying, I'm a hedge witch.
No, I mean, that's true in all religions. I mean, you have people that like the attention. It's not exclusive to witchcraft, unfortunately. And there are people that are leaders, and they're doing something with their position that is useful and helpful. And that's why they're in that position. Now, I am curious, you were talking earlier in the show about it being the oldest. When you look at the history, how far back can it be traced, and what are some of the things you have found that indicate its ancient roots?
I think you can go back for as long as women have been giving birth to babies, because there's nearly always had to be somebody who helps, and it's an elder. They were known as elders, probably more than hedge witches, because that's who held the knowledge that had been passed to her. And then when they became very superstitious and they feared, then that's when they disappeared into the hedge, basically.
Now, in the hedge witchcraft, do you do some of the things that some witches include some ceremonial magic, like circle casting, which is, I don't know, I mean, in a more ceremonial way. And there's definitely some witchcraft that doesn't do that at all. And then that some really have integrated it. So does the hedge witchcraft incorporate some of that sort of ceremonial magic into it?
We encourage the hedge witches to learn to cast a circle for themselves, remembering it's not a coven. But if they are going to do any magical practice, then we encourage them to create a circle of protection, so that while they're doing it, they feel safe and secure, and that they can carry on doing what they're doing with the knowledge that it's warded.
And do they have sort of tools that they prefer, such as the cauldron or the broom, or there are certain ones? I love cauldrons and brooms myself, just love them in general. But do they have certain tools they prefer to use, or is it individual more what people will use as tools?
We introduce them to all the tools that hedge witches use, in the sense of preparing herbs and cookery and such like. Yes, in the old days they used the cauldron. Today we use a cooker. So we bring them up to the 21st century, but nevertheless we give them all the tools, whether it be a wand, a smudge fan, whether it's a crystal wand, an athame. We show them all the tools. If they want to take those up and it resonates with them, then that's fine. It's got to resonate with them. We can't push a particular tool on them and say, well, you must have that one because, no, if it calls to you, it calls to you.
And there was something else I was going to ask, and now it just went out of my head about the tools, and I can't remember now. Now, do you also, I think you mentioned that because of the course, you celebrate the 8 cycles of the year, the 8 periods, which again, some witches only do the 4, some the 8, depending on, so it sounds like you do practice the 8, that the solstices and then the quarters.
Yes, we do the equinoxes and the solstices, and obviously we do air, fire and water. So we call in those. We get them to practice to call in the energies of that they're going to work with. It sort of makes you a very proud mama hedge witch when they first start out and they can't do anything and their voice is a little and they're reading it off a piece of paper, and then now they're sort of out there sort of being able to shout it out, and it's so great to watch them. So yes, we teach them about the different wheels. They learn the Celtic wheel, but also we teach them the goddess wheel, which is also the same as the Native American wheel. So we teach them that as well, so that they know they have the choice. Traditionally, we use the Celtic wheel, though, for hedge witchery, but that doesn't mean to say it's set in stone for everybody.
So the Native American would be the directions, the wheel.
Yes.
And do you do the 8 directions, or is it 9 or 10? I forget. North, south, east, west, above, below.
We keep it simple to the 4 elements.
To the 4 elements.
And it just varies to the different compass directions you're calling them to.
Now I remember what I was thinking earlier. In a lot of witchcraft, you see people embrace the concept of the familiar, or maybe called the totem by some people. Do hedge witches also encourage that connection and build relationships with either familiars that are alive or in the spirit element, like the dragon would be not necessarily an alive familiar?
We encourage them to connect with their spirit animal, and we also give them information about familiars, and they can choose to have a familiar. In fact, I'm really surprised I haven't been joined by a very large ginger one that normally likes to make itself known. So, if it does suddenly appear, that's my familiar.
Yeah, that seems to be a very common one for a lot of people, actually, witches or non-witches. So we're bird people. So ours always come. Yes, we have I don't know if we mentioned before, but we have a rescued crow. And she's 23 now, and she's losing her eyesight, but she's really doing very well with it. It's amazing.
Oh,
So yeah, she's
who
taught
would
us a
know
lot.
that they lived for so long? That's amazing.
Yes, they can in captivity. I think they can live even longer. I mean, she's definitely old, but I think they can go into their 30s. There's probably some that are even older. I don't know. I know the record for a raven, which is a slightly different thing, cousin to the crow, is 60 years old.
Wow.
And he was very, like, he'd lost all his eyes and had to be, I think, given to another person. So that was unusual. And, but he was 60 years old. So I think that who knows how long crows can live. Some of it's genetics
They're
and
very
some of it.
intelligent. I've got a lot of time for them because we call them Morgans in Glastonbury.
Oh, well, yes, that is what the Morgan is, one of the deities associated with the crow, definitely. And we have definitely a lot of respect for the Morgan. And I have, by the way, I took a course from someone who teaches that. And that's the other question I was going to ask you is doing a Zoom course versus the in-person course must be a little bit different for you from a teaching point of view even. And then also, obviously, from an experiential point of view. So maybe talk about that a little bit.
Well, it means we can't take them out on the land of Avalon, but we will be videoing it and taking them with us. So they will get the experience, but we also invite them to find it on their land, wherever they may be, whether they're calling in from Australia, America, or Europe. So it's about finding their land and to be able to come back to us and show what they've been able to do. So we can give them an idea and the flavour of what we're doing. But yes, the only thing really is that we can't take them to places. But nearly everything else we can do.
Sure.
So that's great.
So what do you mean exactly by finding their land? Is that something where they feel connected to the place more, that's this sort of a special, maybe there's some trees there or water that they feel sort of reverence to?
Yes. It's about finding that sacred space for themselves and being attuned with nature and opening their eyes and looking really deep into nature and actually seeing all the little bugs and, the colors of the feathers of the birds and, even the smell of petals in the hedgerow, whatever it might be. The different smells throughout the season of the hedgerow is quite amazing. So it's quite important.
Well, and I think that's really wonderful. I think anything too connected. I was drawn to witchcraft after being in Tibetan Buddhism because of the strong connection to nature. I always had a strong connection since I was a little girl. And I always found it I had a lot of magical experiences just without any kind of magical knowledge. So there is something so profound about nature teaching us and, finding places where it seems easier to learn from nature.
Yeah. And I think you can learn an awful lot about yourself when you're sitting alone with nature, and it's good for your mental health. It's very good if you've had a really stressful day or you are feeling a bit depressed and down, then there's nothing better than going and sitting in nature and actually observing other life around you going around its daily stuff.
Well, I remember when I was going through a really hard time with people in my 30s and I was spending a lot more time in nature and I wasn't as lonely. You start to see that there are other beings that want to interact with you, from your friendly squirrels to flowers that seem to energetically come at you with some sort of welcoming energy. And I'm not saying that because we're social animals, but it seems like one can be less lonely in the world if you're going through a hard time with relationships, if you spend time connecting with animals and trees and flowers and water and the wind, that begin to see that there's more than one way to relate to life, is how I would say.
I think it's very healing. I think it's incredibly healing. And a lot of people have found that on the course, that since they have been connecting more with nature, that they're less stressed. They're just, there's a bigger issue going on out there than somebody just annoying them. It's very, very healing. Very healing. And you can see really how the hedge witches could actually live on their own and actually be okay with it. They didn't miss people. They loved being on their own within their woods with their squirrels and their foxes and their badgers, or whatever country it might be. They loved it because they were all their friends, and they're so uncomplicated animals.
That brought to mind the poet Mary Oliver, who, I don't know if you know her. She's very well known and not alive anymore, but she wrote these beautiful poems about nature, and she lived a pretty isolated life, except when she was, I think, with her partner, lived in the woods and had and often spent a lot of time alone. And she has that kind of head. And I don't think she really was comfortable with being popular. That was not, even though she just kept doing what she normally would do, but you never got the sense that it changed her at all. Like, she just kept doing things she would normally do.
I can understand that, because it's, the hedge witch of olden times, it wasn't about a popularity thing or a social thing. They were happy, and more than happy, to be on their own, because they didn't want to stick their head up over the hedge for obvious reasons. And that's why they were sought out. And unfortunately, you had the witchcraft murders. So yeah, very difficult.
Are you talking about the witch hunt period?
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It is true from the history, even though it was found to be exaggerated, the numbers, but it is true that there were a lot of single women chosen, and women that owned property. That was often, they wanted the property too, I think.
How dare they live without a man and be successful at running their own estate. Yes, I mean, that happened a lot. Superstition, perhaps a woman whose child died in childbirth accused her of being a witch, and that perpetuates the arrests, the hangings. But you're right, it was very much exaggerated. At least the numbers that were reported are very exaggerated. So
it's still pretty awful. I have a fairly fascinated, I'm fascinated with the witch hunts on some level, because of the whole scapegoat element. And of course, certain countries were far worse than others. And why was it? And no matter how, even though the numbers were exaggerated, it was still a lot of people. And also, it was a terrible thing. Then I don't want to make it sound like it was just, and some of it, different theories about, well, we should probably do another show on it at some point. But it was a terrible thing. And there is an element that, even though men were killed too, there was a misogynist element to it, because it was, depending on what, especially if you look at the Hammer of Witchcraft, there's a lot of misogyny in that manual. So it's a very strange and troubling long period of history that still, it's just morphs into something else. I don't know that it's gone away completely in terms of the energy beneath it. So
no, I think you're right there, because men didn't like the fact that women had not more knowledge than they did, and they did not understand the mysteries of childbirth. So this became a real problem. And also, a lot of the witches had more success in healing people than their quackery doctors that came. More people died from the quackery doctors than
Wow.
they did naturally. So, it was because they've been so badly treated. But with Hedge Witchery, everything was natural.
And it's interesting where it's carried on for women in this, the 20th century and even 21st, is that physicians and doctors, they didn't even really take women's bodies seriously until recently, some of the hormonal things. And there's still a lot of ways in which it's discounted. And that's only, I think, because honestly, women got involved with the idea, like, we need to figure out why this is going on and try different remedies. And you can also look at mental health, where women were, sort of went through lobotomies and things like that because they were supposedly hysterical, and sometimes it was physiological and sometimes it was nothing. So maybe that's where some of it kind of carried on in a sense. But in fact, I did want to ask you, what is the relationship with the hedge witches and the body? Because that's one of the other reasons why I like witchcraft, because it accepts the body. It wants, it accepts all aspects of, sexuality and being here on earth and being comfortable and whole in your body.
Yes, and they would believe in reincarnation. They would believe in the spirit world and being connected in their bodies, but also being able to channel and to be able to connect with spirit. And so, yes, they were very much into their own body. And they always depicted witches as being warted, ugly, big-nosed, horrible looking women, and they weren't. Some of them were very young and beautiful, and there was nothing, just average Mrs. Hedge Witch. She there was nothing there that was patriarchal, trying to make them ugly. And it's very sad, because actually a Hedge Witchery doesn't make any judgments, no judgments.
I like that a lot. That's perfect. Now, if people were interested in taking your course, when would the next one start?
In bulk next year. So it's the beginning of February.
And would they just go to your website to sign up? Is that how they would find out more?
Yes, everything's being loaded up at the moment, so they probably won't see it for the next few days, because we've sent a whole lot of new information through, which my web mistress is getting through at the moment. So yes, just give us until maybe another week, 10 days, and then it will be all loaded up.
And for those of you listening that don't know, we have the guest contact on our website all the time, so you can go and find the contact, and I'll try to link it in the comments below as well, so you can go to her website if you're interested. And also you do other courses like karmic astrology, I believe, and
yes, I still do those and teach the Thoth Tarot as well, and I teach ceremonies. So yes, I'm busy.
Yeah, I would say so.
I make you laugh. Back in March, I was taken into hospital as an emergency. And of course, the paramedics came here and they took me away. And when they got me to A&E, they said, "You're a witch, aren't you? We saw your house. You're a witch." So I said, "Yes, I am." So they said, "Will you hex my ex?"
Oh my God, that's brilliant.
And I said, "Well, that's more than my life's worth. But if I'm going to die here today, I'll make it the last thing on my list."
Well, that would certainly be powerful if you did that. And glad you didn't, though. Glad you're here with us.
But it was quite funny. And by the time I'd reached the top floor in the hospital, by the end of the week, and the discharge doctor said, "You can go home," he said, "But before you go, I need to ask you something. I've heard you're a witch."
Wow. That is so amazing.
Made its way all the way up through the floors from A&E.
That's a funny story. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. Loved seeing you again, and
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. And it's so good to see you both.
And we thank you all for listening in. To join us next time as we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure together. Have a beautiful solstice.